to read between the lines. Got to read.
Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we are very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. My friends, I want to get into just some quick tidbits of news, all correlated to the events of today. And then we're going to get into some history about some other cultural revolutions that have taken place throughout the world, which were literally responsible for killing literally hundreds of millions of people. And I know our minds can't put that together. You know, it's like Stalin said, you know, the death of one person is a tragedy, the death of a million people is merely a number. Because our minds cannot put the understanding, we just can't fathom that people can be so depraved, so evil, that we can do this to our fellow man. So before we get into these cultural movements, and particularly the one that's taken place in our country, I'm wondering if you saw the new budget that came out earlier this week for the city of Austin, Texas. In the budget for the city of Austin, Texas, there is actually allotments to not only defund the police department, but there is an allotment to physically tear down the police headquarters building itself. They're going to do away with all of it so they can create chaos and bring in their foreign UN troops. And you probably saw the picture, I call him Dr. Fraud C. You know, at the ball game, I heard he's got a chicken wing for an arm. I don't get into all that. But he's sitting there, no social distancing, no mask on his face, comfortable as he can be. Every time he's on the TV, he's wearing a mask. As soon as the cameras are off, he takes his mask off. You know, folks, you got to see the writing on the wall here. And then you have Dr. Birx comes out, and I'm going to read her quote, that Americans need to learn to accept the new normal. We're not going back to normal. We're going to a new normal on their dictates. Okay. Now, you probably know that literally there's been hundreds of doctors that have come out and actually called this thing a hoax, a control mechanism, and so forth. But a very courageous Dr. Stella Emanuel, a black woman, she launched a campaign called #HCQWorks. And what did they do with that? They took her off the internet completely. Absolutely completely. I had a very hard time finding it after day 2. And she has been treating patients for months with hydroxychloroquine. And here's her quote, my friends. People who have been very ill with COVID-19 have come to complete wellness within 30 days using HCQ. Hydroxychloroquine will stop COVID-19 in its tracks. Not my words, words of a medical doctor and hundreds of others who have actually carried this task out. And now we have where we have to have the new normal. Now, Dr. Fraud C, you probably saw this week, he's talking, Americans are probably going to need to wear goggles. Did you see that? Americans are probably going to be needing goggles to fight this epidemic. How does that work, my friends? Unbelievable. In some other words, in some other news, the leader of NFAC. Now, what does NFAC, before I tell you what that stands for, that is the black militia group that I told you, that we showed you the footage of down at Stone Mountain down in Georgia, the monuments down there, where there was hundreds of black people in uniform with arms in military regiment, not disciplined military regiment, but military regiment, going along the roads at gunpoint, stopping white people for cash, for reparations for slavery. And this was allowed to go on. Folks, law enforcement is standing down throughout the country. They've let criminals out of prison because the threat of COVID-19, but yet they're taking business owners who are trying to keep their livelihood alive and put them in prison in lieu of. Unbelievable. So back to the leader of NFAC. His name is John. He calls himself John the Grandmaster Johnson. Now, don't laugh at this guy, my friends. Don't just write him off. I want to tell you why. How many militia units, how many community watch groups could put together hundreds of people, determined and motivated, logistically supported and armed, with some military regiment at the snap of a finger? You better wake up. This threat is real. So anyway, NFAC stands for not, and I'm going to use the word fornicating. You can fill in what the real word is. Around coalition. NFAC. Not fornicating around coalition. It's a left-wing black militia group. Well, this past Saturday, they were in Louisville, Kentucky. And I watched his speech, and I took notes from it. And listen to what he said. I wrote this word for word, my friends. That they will kidnap police officers. We hope, this is his language, not mine. We hope we ain't gotta shoot nobody. We hope we wasn't gonna have to make our own citizens arrest of those cops. But I think we got enough people to do it. So we figure we going to arrest them, and when they come to ask us where they at, we got them. Well, can we get them back? You got to bail them out with the loot. Well, we ain't going to pay for them. Well, then you ain't going to get them back. We just going to keep them. 4 weeks from today, we're going to come back here, and we should have an answer. If not, I need you all to repeat after me. If we don't get the truth, the whole truth, and the mother fornicating truth, we are going to burn this mother fornicator down. They're talking about the city of Louisville, Kentucky. And I will assure you, the police will stand down, let it happen. Because you know that motto, when we read this to you many, many, many years ago, and we got it from a source in California. You know that motto, especially, it was L.A., I think we got it out of L.A. or one of them. Anyway, it's out in California. On the side of the police car, it says, to protect and serve, and it went ... Do you remember that? The whole statement is this, my friends. To protect and serve the existing political order. We read that to you verbatim. This is why these cops are standing down. Because they are taking their marching orders from radical leftists who have been seated in a position of power. Okay, enough of tidbits of news. Let's get into some thoughts before we get into today's events. This is George Collins. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. Folks, critical thinking. Can you not see that this is a blown-up hoax? and it's not going to stop. Did you see the quote from Bill Gates just this week? Publicly, numerous TV shows. He quotes, paraphrasing, but I'm going to break this right down for you. He says, virus number 1 is just a trial. This is not paraphrasing. Virus number 2 will be delivered by a terrorist. Quote, unquote. You see, folks, in their thought process, if they tell you what they are going to do to us, there is no harm of karma to them. And they do it gleefully. And they always tell us what they're going to do. They do it through entertainment. They do it through their white papers, if you take the time to research. They do it in their own public speeches. They do it in their closed meetings. They always tell us what they're going to do. So there's no karma placed against them, because in their mindset, if they tell us what they're going to do through the various mechanisms that they do, then it's on you, because we told you. If I walk up to you and with a baseball bat and say, hey, I'm going to clobber you in the gourd, and you don't try to escape from me or avert me or put your hands up in some defensive motion or, strike me somehow before I strike you, it's on you in their mindset. And this is exactly what they are. Let us continue. Here's a quote from Aldous Huxley. The perfect dictatorship would have the appearance of a democracy, but would basically be a prison without walls in which the prisoners would not even dream of escaping. It would essentially be a system of slavery where, through consumption and entertainment, the slaves would love their servitudes. The prison without walls, my friends, is going to be your homes. And you will learn to love your slavery, as you already have, through what? Consumption and entertainment. We are the most consume-driven society in the history of man, and we are the most entertained society in the history of man. And hence, we love our servitude. We also live in a state of fear, and we're afraid to even think that we exist in a prison placed by people that mean nothing but harm to us. Okay, my friends, I want to read again a short portion of Albert Pike's letter to Giuseppe Mazzini. This was written in 1871. And I start this quote, this letter. He breaks down the 3 world wars. When you read this, you can go on the internet and just punch in Albert Pike's 3 World War letter. It'll come up. And you will be astonished at the language that'll be brought forth that you think was invented, say, for World War I and World War II. No, folks, this was planned many years earlier, 40 years for World War I, and the language is already established. So he says, while the other nations, because what they're going to foment is a big war in the Middle East. How long has that been going on? Since the 90s. We have been at war in the Middle East since the 90s. The entire Middle East is aflame. Now he's speaking about the other nations outside the Middle East, just to set the backdrop. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economic exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilist and the atheist. What's a nihilist, my friends? A nihilist is one who destroys and creates a void. A conqueror destroys and then fulfills with his own desires and ideas, rebuilds. A nihilist is one who just destroys to create that void that others will rebuild. to their desires. These people tearing down statues and all historical artifacts of the foundation of our country, and the Western world for that matter, they don't talk about rebuilding anything, do they? All they know is they need to tear this down. These people are nihilists, and none of them believe in God. None of them. They're all atheists. The hierarchy of this movement are Satanists. Let me continue. We shall unleash the nihilist and the atheist, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm. Can you not see the steps they are taking us down? We already have a slight social cataclysm going on right now, as bad as it is. It's going to get a lot worse, my friends. There are more events coming. Let me continue. We shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror, and it is going to get horrific, will show clearly to the nations of the world the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. My friends, that's what's coming to our country. And if you think you're living in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont and you're going to escape all this, you're wrong. The Not Fornicating Around Coalition and the like of that will wind up here. Hell, we even had a demonstration here in Little St. Johnsbury, Vermont, of between 100 and 125 people, and they were very disruptive. They were blocking the public access to the police department and the fire department. And do you know what the police chief did? Do you think he stopped them from disturbing the peace? No. He went out and genuflected to him. This is what's going on. This is why the police are not intervening. And let us not forget from the Rodney King riots, let us not forget the lawsuit from the woman. It wasn't Reginald Denning who got pulled out of the truck and almost beaten to death. It was a woman who was raped multiple times and beaten to death and left to die. And I forget her name, and I apologize. But she sued the LAPD for not protecting her. And the court ruled that the police are under no obligation for your protection. Zero. After all, they serve and protect the existing political order. Okay, my friends, let's get into the Cultural Revolution. And before we do that, I want to play a short video for you of a very courageous young lady who was raised in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Yugoslavia, during the 90s. And she has a message for the American people. And she's very particular about her language. She's speaking English. And listen to how she breaks down what happened in Yugoslavia in the 90s, complete civil war. How they divided the people, what mechanism they used, and what took place. And as you're listening to this very courageous young lady, I want you to put together what she's explaining to you happened in her nation and the current events of today in our nation. We'll see you on the return.
Hundreds of millions of deaths in the 20th century and countless suffering. Now, proponents of that religion want to run the experiment once again And in that experiment, you, people of America, will be lab mice. Not so long ago, I was a lab mouse of dictators in my country. That country was Yugoslavia. Rather than giving you lessons about history of my country, I want to give you the timeline of the events which led to an extremely bloody war and dissolution of Yugoslavian Federacy. I will leave it to you to make conclusions about similarities with recent events in the United States. In the 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall marked the victory of the free world over tyrannical monstrosity of communism across the Europe. However, Yugoslav communists didn't feel like letting go of their precious powers. Since the climate in Europe was extremely anti-communist at the time, they knew they needed a new strategy, an ideology that would seduce the masses and keep the power in their hands. So they come up with a very clever idea, to rebrand the communism in Yugoslavia and to change its name into socialism. Not any type of socialism, but a very special type, the National Socialism. Sounds familiar? The playbook they used to progress with their agenda was already tested in Nazi Germany. To establish National Socialism, you must first install hatred in people. In order to create genocidal levels of hatred, you must divide people of one country in well-defined groups. In other words, you must create tribal or groupthink. This can be achieved in different ways. You can divide people by ethnicity, by race, by religion. You can let your imagination go wild. Since Yugoslavs were white and practically indistinguishable among themselves, the only card they could play was the religion card. Yugoslavia was very mixed religion-wise, and we had Orthodox Christian Serbs, Catholic Croats and Slovenes, and Muslim Bosnians. A perfect starting position. In the next phase, you must start making such social policies so terrible that will inevitably lead to the countless individual disadvantages. When the consequences of such government policies become obvious, you must start claiming that the cause of those inequalities is nothing but discrimination and hatred of one group towards another, and naturally, you must start screaming that those inequalities must be corrected by favoring the oppressed, discriminated group over the oppressor group. Enter national quotas for hiring. Now just replace national with race or women. Once the groups are formed and well defined, it's needless to say that all the mainstream media in Yugoslavia were government controlled and were fueling the narrative about mutual discrimination and hatred relentlessly. The growing fear and feeling of insecurity destroyed relationships, marriages, friendships. As fear of discrimination and hostility among groups were growing, people started retreating and isolating within their own groups because they didn't feel safe anymore with the individuals of the other group. All of a sudden, staged and very well organized mass protests started all over the country. Protests against the oppression and killing of one group by another. At first, those protests were peaceful, but soon enough, rioting and burning started. Now that you have the attention of the public, you need sparks. What is a spark? A spark is a convenient event of murdering of a random member of one group by a hateful member of another. And you usually need more than one of those. At this point, people were still not completely divided. There were still reasonable people left, those who understood we are all one nation under God, and that we will not kill each other under any circumstances. They went out protesting together, singing for peace and holding their hands. But the hunger for the absolute power of socialists was stronger than our love for each other. And shootings and attacks at protesters continued. In the next phase, the tipping point with no return was reached. People started erecting barricades at the entrance of their cities, their neighborhoods, even on highways and roads. Barricades were guarded with armed civilians. Each and every attempt of the law enforcement to remove barricades and to de-escalate the situation was in vain, since they would be ambushed and killed. Peace couldn't be restored anymore, because headlines, photos and videos of dead people propagated through mass media became too explicit and horrifying. Even those hardcore idealists who believed in one nation under God, peace and love, snapped under the pressure. At that point, army was deployed to restore order, but they couldn't do much, because they were clueless about who was the perpetrator and who was the victim. Simply because there were perpetrators and victims on both sides. In the final stages, even the army was attacked during the negotiated retreat and 50 or 100 soldiers were killed. And just like that, Yugoslavia found itself in a civil war. City against city, village against village, family against family, and so on until the whole territories became cleaned of the members of the enemy group. Genocide, ethnic cleansing, relocation of hundreds of thousands of people were everyday news. It lasted 4 years. 100,000 people died. Some 500,000 were displaced. Those people lost everything. Yugoslavia was drowned in the bloods of thousands of innocent people and destroyed forever. You might wonder how we let that happen. How could we let things get so much out of control? That was because we didn't realize who were the real enemies, the enemies of the Yugoslav people as a whole. Instead, we were brainwashed into buying the story that we, the people, are the enemies of each other, while our true enemies were advancing with their sick, demented agenda, which had as the ultimate goal the total and unlimited power. This brings me to present times, the year 2020, and to you, American people. Unless you were living under the rock, you might have noticed that something very strange and vicious is happening in your country. But you're not exactly sure what it is and where it came from. Because the last time you checked, you were one nation under God, a country of free, independent individuals with equal rights under the law and core values of life, liberty and pursuit of happiness. All of a sudden, there is protesting, rioting, arson, murder, destruction of public and private property, and lots of people screaming how unbelievably racist and unjust America is. And before you even manage to prepare your morning coffee and turn the TV on, once united Americans are at each other's throat, and a bunch of nice and caring people on TV are telling you how you should accept the violence and hatred against Americans because you deserve it. If you have paid attention to what happened in Yugoslavia, I hope you have realized by now that your true enemies are not your fellow Americans. The ones who are, they want you to hate each other and to kill each other, while they're taking away your constitutional rights, your freedoms and your country, your heritage, your way of life and the future of your children. Although it is more than obvious that there are very well organized groups used as tools to install and amplify hate and to create division between Americans, there are only metastases which have spread through once healthy America. Of course, they are violent terrorist organizations and they must be removed as well. But the main cancer that is killing America, the one where all this mayhem is coming from, is somewhere else. The real and extremely dangerous enemies of American people are the elected officials in your government, in your states, in your courts. Representatives, governors, mayors, judges. The ones who are pulling the ropes. The ones who hate America and American people so much that would even sacrifice the life and prosperity of their own children just to see it burn to the ground and American blood spilled. Those are really sick, demented, ideologically possessed people, and they are in high positions in the government. They are governing your states, your cities, and making decisions in your courts. You know very well who they are. You know very well what they already did to once beautiful and prosperous American states and cities. They are resentful, power and bloodthirsty. They want you and your children suffering in misery and begging them for mercy. They won't stop, no matter how much you try to appease them, unless you, American people, stop them. You're maybe thinking this is not possible, but think again. How many of them tyrants are out there, and how many of you decent American people? What makes them think they can do whatever they want with you? That they can play you for a fool over and over again, and that they're invincible? What makes them think they're gods, morally and intellectually superior compared to you, freedom-loving Americans? Yes, you guessed it. The fact that they managed to get away with it every single time. They faced no pushback and not a single consequence for their crimes against American people. The time has come for them to pay for their treason. How you should act? First thing that you must do: stop caring whether you've been called a racist, a white supremacist, a selfish person who wants to spread the C-1984, or whatever nice name they have for you. This irrational fear of stigma, a phobia of being called a racist, has way more destructive implications than you can even imagine. Stop caring whether you'll offend anyone. Number of people offended by you practicing your First Amendment rights is directly proportional to how successful you are in that. Which means, the more offended, the merrier. Stop attempting to have a fact or logic-based rational conversation. Stop explaining yourself. It's useless. You're wasting your precious time and energy. They have a playbook, and changing their minds is not part of it. Second, exercise your Second Amendment rights. This means study carefully and in detail gun laws in your state. Next, arm yourself. If you have never used a gun before, make sure to take a basic gun training. This is very important because you must know how to use a gun properly to protect yourself, your family, and your property, so that you can avoid hurting yourself or innocent people as a consequence of improper gun use. Be a responsible gun owner. Third and most important, exercise your First Amendment rights. Of course, it is very important to vote in November, but I'm afraid it will not be enough. I have seen such a diversity of ways socialists used to steal the elections in Yugoslavia, and I'm absolutely sure your tyrants will give their best to do the same. You must act now. You must go out on the streets, peacefully assemble and protest against tyranny and infringement of your God-given rights. Millions and millions of you decent American people, you must have your voices heard. You must send a very loud and a very clear message to the elected officials in the federal government and in your states that enough is enough, and that you want them to take action now against tyranny. Remind them why you voted for them and why they are elected. Remind them of their sacred duty to protect the vision of founding fathers of the United States of America. Tell them you want your constitutional rights defended and protected. Tell them you want your history preserved. Tell them you want to be able to freely exercise your rights to free speech, to be able to freely and openly show the love for your country, to be able to proudly put American flag in front of your house, and to openly show your pride of your heritage, your culture, and your nation. Tell them you stand proudly with American law enforcement and that you got their back in the same way you want them to have yours. Tell them you want to be treated as grown-up individuals who can make their own decisions. Tell them that there is no place for socialism in America. Tell them you want the traitors of American people out of their offices and out of government. Tell them you want them charged and prosecuted for treason and crimes against humanity. And that if they're not removed from the government and from their offices, that you, freedom-loving Americans, will unleash all your anger on tyrants and you will remove them yourself. It is your constitutional obligation to protect the legacy of founding fathers and to fight against any form of tyrannical government which infringes upon your constitutional rights. Never forget why you celebrate the Independence Day. Don't be afraid whether you will get attacked for exercising your First Amendment rights. You certainly will be. If that happens, defend yourself. Remember, self-defense is not violence, no matter what they tell you and what they accuse you of. President Trump is on your side, and on the side of liberty. Because if he weren't, they wouldn't try this hard to sabotage him in every way possible, to make a nightmare out of his life and his presidency, and to remove him from the office. He's in their way of them getting what they want. But he cannot fight this battle alone. He's having a very hard time right now, defending your freedoms. That's why you must show him you stand tall and proud with him, united in a fight against tyranny, against hate and violence, and against the ultimate evil of socialism. You must show your open and unlimited support to his vision of draining the swamp and protecting the law and order and freedoms of American people. You must understand that, besides being a gatekeeper of free America, President Trump is also a gatekeeper of the free world. This means that if we, free people of the world, lose America, we will lose the world as well. You must not make the same mistakes us Yugoslavs made, because the only casualties of our mistakes were ourselves. This is different because now the future of the whole free world is in your hands. Having all that said, I hope you will go out on 4th of July in tens of millions and celebrate Independence Day with your presidents as you should, as free Americans. God bless President Trump, and God bless America.
My friends, that should be a very, very strong awakening for you. And if you wish to study more at the street level, at the survivalist level, at the combat level of what took place in Yugoslavia at the same time period, I invite you to look up Silco. S-I-L-C-O. Just punch it in, it'll come up. This gentleman, it's not for the faint of heart, describes to you in absolute truth the catechism of the society, the horrific events that the people went through in Yugoslavia. And just as this young lady did, describes to you, it was outside sources that created the whole thing, just like here in the United States. Mao Zedong, depending on who you read, is responsible for killing between 60 and 100 million people. Who financed Mao Zedong? Of course, we have his famous statement, power comes from the barrel of a gun. There was a professor at the time who did a study on this in China. And listen to his words. We're being ruled by people who are trying to enforce their extreme views on others by shaming and ruining people who don't think the same way. This is a cancel culture. This is what they're doing. This is why they're taking people of position, not going along with the whole hoax, COVID-19, and shutting them down, ruining them professionally, destroying our historical monuments and all. A cancel culture. This is what's going on in this country. This is a cancel culture. Public humiliation, professional standing being destroyed, financial careers are destroyed. A Mao brand of intolerance. Do you remember how we had to be tolerant? We had to be tolerant. We got to accept gays. We got to accept the drug use. We got to accept, all the crime, all the corruption. Then it went to we have to, we got to accept gay marriage. Now we have to accept transgenderism. We had to accept abortion. Now we're accepting babies being kept alive and having their hearts cut out of them while they're alive to keep the heart beating so it can be sold for profit. Because we have to be tolerant. Now it's LBGQTP. P. Now we have to accept pedophilia. And they're working that way. You got the drag queens in the schools. You got registered pedophilias with children on their laps, giving them the grind, and the parents are applauding it. A mild brand of intolerance. This woke ideology by media, local authorities, publishers, businesses, and academia sums it right up what's going on today, doesn't it? The media, the local authorities, the mayors, the governors, the DAs, the publishers, the businesses, you're all cooperating, most of you, right? The big businesses, the big corporations get to do business, the mom and pops don't. Funny how this COVID-19 is so selective. You can catch it in church, but you can't catch it having an abortion. You can catch it in a small mom and pop store, but not at Walmart. Mao, in 1966, he tasked mobs was to purge capitalistic and traditional elements from Chinese society. What's going on in our country today? Mobs were young people and urban workers which formed the Red Guard paramilitary units. What is going on today? Young people in the cities, young people, urban workers. They formed the Red Guard. You know them as BLM and you know them as Antifa. Went after anyone who tied to an official blacklist, particularly elderly Chinese and intellectuals. What is going on today? Their goal was to rid of the four olds. 1, old culture. 2, old ideas. 3, old habits. 4, old customs. That is the makeup of a society right there, and this is what the same thing that's going on today in our country. All churches were destroyed. What are we up to right now? I think it's 38 churches have been burned in the United States alone. Never mind, Notre Dame and all that in France and everything else. Police accused of a thought crime. Folks, this is 1966. People accused of a thought crime could avoid punishment by confessing publicly, undergoing re-education, and agreeing to what was known as struggle sessions, which entailed torture and humiliation. You remember when Hillary Clinton was talking about we need to have what? Education camps for adults. Similarities. The hate of the old period in time. Old is a euphemism for history. This is my notes now. Old is a euphemism for history, for community standards, for social cohesiveness, and for individual learning through the importance of religion. Them are the 4 things that they are destroying, which make up the foundation of our society, my friends. And the police are standing down. But they'll come arrest you, give you a courtesy beating for not wearing a mask. When you destroy all these things, you also destroy what? Morality as the foundation of our society. The knowledge of giving principles within the society and economy, my note. Mao was financed by a portion of the Marshall Plan. Matter of fact, General George Marshall gleefully spoke of it. And he wrote, I have been able to accomplish with a pen what would have taken regiments of soldiers and their supporting companies. What was he writing about? He was writing about getting Mao Zedong in power in China, the communist murdering dictator, and then getting a Republican, I don't mean as the party, I mean as a way of government, Chiang Kai-shek slaughtered and what was left of his people and him off to a little island known as Formosa at the time. You know it as Taiwan today. So who financed him? Evidence published, I got 3 authors here, George Klackloff, Stephen Passoni, and Michael Futrell. They all demonstrate that the return of Lenin to Russia and his exiled party of Bolsheviks was organized by the German government. The necessary funds were transferred through the NYA Bank in Stockholm. The German objectives were 1, the removal of Russia from the war, World War I, control of post-war Russian markets, and where the funding come from. Oh, I'm sorry, let me back up. Olaf Oxenberg was the liaison right at that point for the NYA Bank in Stockholm. But the actual funding came from, listen to this, the Guaranteed Trust Company in New York. Folks, Guaranteed Trust Company is J.P. Morgan. Oxenberg was the Morgan agent in Russia. He was the financial intermediary for the revolutionaries, and after became the head of the Roskenbaum Bank and the first Soviet which was the first Soviet International Bank. Unbelievable. Max May became the vice president then of the Guaranteed Trust, working directly through Morgan, and became then later director and chief of the Roskenbaum Foreign Department. Trotsky's funding in the United States was by von Rosenstadt, a senior partner of Amsonic Company, was owned by American International Corporation, which was also controlled by J.P. Morgan. Ludwig Martins was the first Soviet ambassador to the United States, was backed and controlled by the Guaranteed Trust Company, Morgan. William Boyce Thompson, director of the Federal Reserve, a large stockholder of the Chase Bank, Rockefellers, New York. donated over $1 million to the Bolshevik Revolution movement. Guarantee Trust also financed the Carranza and Pancho Villa War, terrorist war, activities down in Mexico. The 1912 Sun Yat-sen Revolution in China was the liaison negotiator for that was Charles B. Hill, was Sun Yat-sen. And he was a director of 3 Westinghouse subsidiaries, J.P. Morgan. Also, Charles R. Crane of Westinghouse was in Russia during the Russian Revolution. British War Cabinet papers and the British policy was diverted towards Lenin and Trotsky regime by personal intervention of William B. Thompson. William B. Thompson at that time was on the board of the Federal Reserve, with Lloyd George also on the Federal Reserve Board in December of 1917. And through Deputy Chairman William Lawrence Sanders, also on the Federal Reserve Board of New York. All activities were monitored through them, through the liaisons between the bankers and the banks of Russia. Also, Colonel Edward Mandell House, we did a whole show on him, aide-de-camp to President Wilson, was personally responsible not only for the Lusitania and getting us into World War I, but he was a coordinating liaison between all the international bankers, and he was also responsible for getting Trotsky and Lenin and his 13 compadres that went there, their passports into Russia. Amazing. The banker liaison between the United States and the other international banks involved was a gentleman by the name of John Reed. I have not ever heard of John Reed before, so I did some very interesting research on him, and this man was up to his elbows in corruption, in murder, in extortion, everything that goes along with having a cultural revolution. Alexander Gumberg, the representative of the U.S. firm, became the representative of that U.S. firm in Petrograd, worked for the Thompson's America Red Cross mission. That's right, my friends, we've got into the Red Cross before. The Red Cross was all part of these movements, okay? Just like the Catholic Relief. The 2 biggest ones were the Catholic Relief and the American Red Cross, okay? Became chief agent in Scandinavia until he was discovered and deported from Norway. He then became, listen to this, the confidential assistant of Reeves Shelby. Reeves Shelby should ring a name to you folks, the bigwig at the Chase Bank, Rockefellers, okay? Activity on behalf of the Bolshevik organization, in large part from the single address. So I had to look up this one. When I was going through these documents, I kept finding this one address, 120 Broadway, New York City, New York. Kept coming up constantly. So I got online and I looked up, okay, what building, what organization was at 120 Broadway, New York City in New York at that time? Guess what, my friends? It was the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Now, the Guarantee Trust Company, the J.P. Morgan, was right next door at 140 Broadway, New York City. And also the Bankers Club was also at 120 Broadway, New York City. Thomas W. Lamont, head of J.P. Morgan, all right, was also formed the banking network, and John Reed was a direct liaison through Lamont. He also arranged the $100 million loan in 1926 to Italy, to Al Duce Mussolini, all right? Also included was Otto Kahn. Remember Otto Kahn? We've got into him before many, many times. Okay, folks, I got to stop. I think you get the idea of this, that collectively this plan that I just described to you was known as the Marburg Plan, M-A-R-B-U-R-G. I invite you, because of the sake of time, I've got 3 more pages listing of the bankers and all of it. But the one corporation I got to name to you was Otto Kahn, was also director of the American International Corporation, and he was also on the board of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Can you say Paul Warburg, the father of the Federal Reserve private for-profit banking institution? Okay, he is known as the father of the Fed. Okay. a premeditation of a kind of superficial schizophrenia, which in fact masks an integrated program of power acquisition. That is in the Marburg Plan's preface to the whole plan. Let me read that again. A premeditation of a kind of superficial schizophrenia, which in fact masks an integrated program of power acquisition. Unbelievable. And of course, it goes on. What then if the international financiers and the socialists could be organized in a movement to control the formation of a league to enforce peace? Do you know what they were talking about, my friends? The League of Nations, just like the UN, all set up on crisis, all so they can come in peace. Okay, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. You must understand, the leading Bolsheviks who took over Russia were not Russian. No, they were American. They hated Russians. They hated Christians. Driven by ethical hatred, they tortured and slaughtered millions of Russians without a shred of human remorse. It cannot be overstated, Bolshevism committed the greatest human slaughter of all time. The fact that most of the world is ignorant and uncaring about this enormous crime is proof that the global media is in the hands of the perpetrators. The global media, he's saying, is in the hands of the globalists, the bankers. He continues, in our country, the lie has become not just a moral category, but a pillar of the state. In our country, the lie has become not just a moral category, but a pillar of the state. Folks, you can say the same thing for what's going on here in these United States today. Solzhenitsyn continues, not everything has a name. Some things lead us into a realm beyond words. My friends, that's where we're going. In the future, it is going to be almost impossible to describe the cataclysm of society, the horrific events that they are bringing us to. The strength or weakness of a society depends more on the level of its spiritual life than on its level of industrialization. Neither a market economy nor even a general abundance constitutes the crowning achievement of human life. If a nation's spiritual energies have been exhausted, it will not be saved from collapse by the most perfect government structure or by any industrial development. A tree with a rotten core cannot stand. To destroy a people, you must first sever their roots. This is why they are destroying the foundation of our country, the family, the churches, religion, our history. This is why. They are destroying the very fabric of our society. Modern society is hypnotized by socialism. It is prevented by socialism from seeing the mortal danger it is in. And one of the greatest dangers of all is that you have lost all sense of danger. You cannot even see where it is coming from as it moves swiftly towards you. Folks, you can't see the danger coming. You have no idea who's perpetrating this danger against us, yet you're believing the lies. And those of you that don't believe the lies are in such a state of fear, you don't have the scanage to say, I'm not going to wear a mask. I saw a motorcyclist going down the road last week, folks, with a helmet and goggles on. Okay, that's fine. Wearing a mask. The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. Let me read that again. The simple state of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world. Evil people always support each other. That is their chief strength. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. My friends, wake up to the lie. Do your own research. Understand. This has all been planned out, and understand there is many more tumultuous events that they are going to perpetrate on us as not only a people of the nation, but a people of the world. We are very thankful, my friends, that you take the time from your busy day to view our program. We always close in asking you to seek truth, obtain knowledge, and manifest kindness to your fellow man. And we always close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. And as always, we thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find.